السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. المعاناة في كشمير هي قضية نزاع بين دولتين نوويتين مسلحتين حتى النخاع، تؤثر في السلام والأمن والاستقرار في منطقة جنوب آسيا والعالم بأسره. هي حكاية لا تنتهي لانتهاكات حقوق الإنسان والإبادة والتغيير الديمغرافي. مع رئيس آزاد جامو وكشمير ساردار مسعود خان نتحدث عن الأزمة الكشميرية من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لعل بذور الصراع في كشمير تكمن في تقسيم الهند البريطانية في عام 1947، وقد كانت جامو وكشمير واحدة من أكبر الولايات الأميرية 562 في الهند. وخلال تقسيم عام 1947 أعطيت المنطقة ذات الأكثرية المسلمة في جامو وكشمير خيار الانضمام إما إلى الهند أو إلى باكستان، ولكن عكس رغبات الغالبية المسلمة في جامو وكشمير اختار الحاكم الهندوسي آنذاك المهراج هاري سينغ الانضمام إلى الهند، وبذلك أشعل فتيل صراع مسلح مع انتفاضة شعبية ما زالت ارتداداتها الدموية واللا إنسانية ودموع الأمهات الكشميريات تذرف حتى يومنا هذا. عقب المواجهات في المنطقة عام 48 تم التوصل إلى اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار وتقسيم دولة جامو وكشمير بين باكستان والهند. كلتا الدولتين أرسلتا قواتهما المسلحة إلى المنطقة التي ارتفع الوجود العسكري فيها أضعاف مضاعفة من 24 ألفاً في عام 49 إلى أكثر من 800 ألف اليوم. ولقد خاضت كل من الهند وباكستان 3 حروب في عام 1947 و1965 و1999 حول كشمير، وتمخض الاحتلال العسكري لكشمير عن سقوط أكثر من 250 ألف كشميري على الأقل، وما زالت تمارس الانتهاكات لحقوق الإنسان والاعتداءات حتى الساعة. السيد ساردار مسعود خان رئيس منطقة آزاد جامو وكشمير يشرح من الداخل أسباب الصراع، ولماذا لا تزال القضية الكشميرية غير محلولة، وما هو واقع منطقة آزاد جامو وكشمير.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Jammu and Kashmir region, one part of it has been under the occupation of the Indian state, and there are today 700,000 occupation troops deployed in the Indian occupied Kashmir. So since 1947, the Indian troops have been killing Kashmiris mercilessly and with impunity. And that's why you see all these human rights violations. You mentioned some. I think that according to our count, more than 100,000 Kashmiris have been killed since 1989. But way back in 1947, they had killed 250,000 Kashmiris and pushed some 300,000 Kashmiris to Pakistan. They were forced to migrate, and there was a massacre. And since 1947, year after year, there have been massacres of the Kashmiris, organized pogroms, and you have all sorts of human rights violations there.
But why are the Indians, sir, perpetrating these actions against the Kashmiris?
Because they want to perpetuate their occupation of the territory. They have written into their constitution that this territory is an integral part of the Indian Federation, which is not true. This is the biggest falsehood of the past and this century, because the Kashmiris say that they want freedom, they want their right to self-determination, they want to be masters of their own destiny, and they want to decide what they would choose, what their political future would be.
Exactly.
And India forcibly wants to keep them under their occupation. And that's why there are killings, there are enforced disappearances, there are custodial killings, there are extrajudicial killings. Then these young men, particularly, they are targeted, they are picked up, put into jails, and they are tortured there. So
because they are resisting this Indian control.
Yes, they are resisting. By and large, the bulk of the movement is peaceful. There are hundreds of thousands of people in the Indian occupied Kashmir who want freedom, and they convey this message to India very clearly in their mass rallies that they hold. When, for instance, some Kashmiri men are killed, unarmed Kashmiri men are killed, and when there are burial ceremonies for them, hundreds of thousands of people gather, and they will give this message, unambiguous message to India, that they do not want to be with India, that they want their freedom. They say, go India, go back, leave our Kashmir. This is the message that they have. I mean, Kashmir is like a colony. Kashmir, I mean, previously, like in the colonial period, there used to be colonial powers or occupation powers. India is the occupation colonial power, occupying colonial power
of Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir.
And they are suppressing this resistance for freedom, this campaign for freedom.
Right. Now, allow me to ask you something about Azad Kashmir. It's a self-governing polity administered by Pakistan. How can you explain this, please, as the constitutional leader of the state?
Well,
how can we understand it, do you mean?
Very simply, you go back to 1947, and between July 1947 to October 1947, the people of the Azad Jammu and Kashmir, this territory, which we call Free Kashmir, they had liberated this territory from the rule of the Maharaja, the princely ruler that was there at that time. And they had liberated this territory. That's why it is called Azad Kashmir. On October the 24th, 1947, they constituted this as the Azad government or the free government. And this, in fact, represents all the people, not just the people living in Azad Kashmir, but also the people who are under occupation. And this government was created so that until the day that the entire state exercises its right to self-determination. Later on, we were given a status by the United Nations, also by the government of Pakistan, the Azad government of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We have a president, a prime minister, we have an upper house of parliament and a lower house, and we also have a Supreme Court and a High Court. So it is like a state, but foreign affairs, defense, currency, these matters are communications, these matters are dealt with by the government of Pakistan or the state of Pakistan. They are Pakistan's responsibility.
Right. Now, tell us more about the Pakistan political approach in dealing with Azad Kashmir.
Pakistan's approach towards Azad Kashmir and the whole of Kashmir is that Pakistan supports the Kashmiri struggle for the right to self-determination. Way back in the 1950s, in the 1940s and 50s, Pakistan represented the Kashmiris in the United Nations, and the United Nations at that time determined that the future of Kashmir would be determined by the people of Jammu and Kashmir by holding a referendum or a plebiscite under the auspices of the United Nations. And they would be given two choices, whether to join India or Pakistan. Pakistan's approach towards Azad Kashmir or towards the Indian occupied Kashmir, the whole Jammu and Kashmir, is to uphold, support and endorse their right to self-determination and give political, diplomatic and moral support to our struggle. We also have an administrative relationship with Azad Kashmir and Pakistan have an administrative relationship. and our affairs are governed in accordance with that arrangement. We have our own constitution. The Azad government has its own constitution. It is called the Interim Constitution of 1974.
Right.
And we have a special relationship with the state of Pakistan. But practically, let me tell you that the two parts are inseparable because of the communications and infrastructure network, also because of
the family relations.
Hundreds of thousands of Azad Kashmiris, they are in Pakistan, and they are active in Pakistan's national life. Pakistan also has a presence, and Pakistan's armed forces defend the territory of Azad Kashmir. So we have very close relations. I would say that Azad Kashmir and Pakistan and Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan have a symbiotic relationship, and they are inseparable. In fact, Pakistan, I will always say that Pakistan is incomplete without Jammu and Kashmir, and Jammu and Kashmir doesn't have any identity without Pakistan.
Without Pakistan, right. But you believe, sir, that Jammu and Kashmir, the issue is an international issue. It's not like a bilateral issue as projected by India, which must be resolved in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions by ascertaining the wishes of the Kashmiri people through a referendum, a plebiscite, as you said. Now, what does Pakistan want from Indian-controlled Kashmir? Is it for attaining to the needs and the rights of the Kashmiris, or for more control over this rich strategic area?
Pakistan doesn't want control of Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, Pakistan has always taken this principled stand that the Jammu and Kashmir territory is disputed, and that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have to determine and decide their own future. This is Pakistan's principled stand that it has taken. It respects the wishes and aspirations of the Kashmiri people. And that's why it supports the UN Security Council resolutions, because the UN Security Council resolutions are not saying give this territory or to India or to Pakistan. They say that let Kashmiris decide, and Pakistan endorses that stance taken by the United Nations, or that determination made by the United Nations. So you are absolutely right. Let me tell you that India tries to give the impression that it is a bilateral issue, that it's only between Islamabad and Delhi, and that Kashmiris have nothing to do with it. But Pakistan doesn't support that position. Pakistan gives primacy to the Kashmiris, recognizes the supremacy of their political will. So,
to the respect of the human rights.
Yes, and we believe, we the people of Jammu and Kashmir, we believe, and the people of Pakistan endorse that point of view, that it's an international issue, that and it is, to start with, it's a trilateral issue. You have three parties to the dispute. It is Pakistan, India, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And there is a fourth party, which is the United Nations, because decades ago the United Nations had adopted resolutions which need to be implemented, and they had guaranteed that there would be a fair and long-lasting solution or dispensation of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. So it is an international issue. The reason I emphasize this is that because of the changed circumstances, the United Nations has taken a hands-off approach. They do focus on other international issues, like the issue of Palestine, like issues in Africa, whether they are Mali or South Sudan or Darfur, or issues in West Africa,
and Armenia, and Nagorno-Karabakh.
But they do not pay any attention to the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, although it is on their agenda. Jammu and Kashmir is on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. This agenda item is renewed every year on the agenda of the UN Security Council, and yet they shy away from taking any action. I mean, no discussions or deliberations are held in the Security Council chambers on Kashmir. Kashmir is burning, it faced such a traumatic situation in the past 2 weeks.
Right.
And yet, United Nations Security Council has not pronounced itself on the plight of the Kashmiris.
Right.
The Secretary General's office has given a muted response, or 2 or 3 statements have been issued.
Why do you think this is taking place? And there is a clear resolution in the UN, regarding Kashmir.
Yes, and according to the Charter of the United Nations, it is the responsibility of the United Nations to work for the maintenance of peace and security, and there is a potent threat to peace and security in Kashmir. And the United Nations is also the guarantor and custodian of human rights. It works for promotion and protection of human rights all over the world, and human rights are being violated and trampled with
on daily basis.
On daily basis in the Indian occupied Kashmir. Your question, why is the United Nations silent or reluctant to take an action? The reason is very simple. This is because of double standards. This is because of major powers' growing economic and strategic relationship with India. And they find their relationship very lucrative, very profitable, or they think that India probably at some point would help them decelerate the pace of progress of China, which they perceive to be an adversary. So it's because of the complexity of the international politics that the United Nations is mute, and the international community or major powers are silent. They pay lip service to promotion and protection of human rights when you go to the Human Rights Council, or you go to the United Nations General Assembly, or even the Security Council. But when it comes to Kashmir, what you see is they have sealed their lips and they turn a blind eye. India propagates falsehoods to demonize Pakistan, to demonize Kashmiris, and this also is a ploy to project Pakistan in a wrong perspective. But let me tell you, first let me tell you how they distort the Kashmiri movement. They project the Kashmiri movement as a terrorist movement, or they say that in Delhi, they tell to their own constituencies and abroad to other countries that they are fighting terrorism in Kashmir. This is not true. They are not fighting terrorism. They are, in fact, campaigning against and imposing their will against the Kashmiris, the peaceful, peace-loving Kashmiris, through state terrorism. If you have to determine who is the terrorist in Kashmir, it is the Indian government and the occupation forces. Kashmiris are not terrorists. They are asking for their inalienable right to self-defense, also to exercise their political will. India keeps on harping on this myth that Kashmiris through elections have exercised their right to self-determination. To that, Kashmiris say no. They said they haven't exercised their right to self-determination.
Right. Sir, allow me to ask you this last question before we go into a break. You believe that only a politically and economically strong Pakistan can guarantee a just resolution of the Kashmir dispute. So is this to say that Pakistan is still weak or not strong enough to resolve this dispute?
I would put it this way, that a stronger Pakistan and more prosperous Pakistan would be in a position to guarantee a just solution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Pakistan is doing well, but it hasn't realized its full potential as an economic power. Because of the war on terrorism for the past 1.5 decades, Pakistan has missed many opportunities to develop this nation as one of the strongest nations in the world. It has the potential, it has the strategic location, its population is 207 million, and the human resource development has been taking place. You have the human capital.
It's a young country.
Yes, it's a
very young country.
Very young country, but it hasn't realized its full potential. When I say that an economically strong Pakistan and politically strong Pakistan, that would guarantee. What I mean is that Pakistan is the only sovereign window that we have to the international community, because Kashmiris otherwise are unrepresented in the international community. The people in the Indian occupied Kashmir or Azad Kashmir's people are fortunate that they are represented through Pakistan in the international fora. But as far as the people of Indian occupied Kashmir are concerned, they are stateless people, because their voice is not heard in the United Nations Security Council or in the General Assembly or in the Human Rights Council. So if Pakistan is strong politically and economically, then other nations would listen to Pakistan. Today they are listening to India because of its economic clout. They think that India is this economic powerhouse and that they can do these transactions, economic transactions with India, and that's why because of the lure of investment and trade.
And also the Prime Minister of India's Modi's connections and, you know, trying to sell more the issue of India and its control more.
Yes, he's the harbinger of Hindutva, violent extremism in India. He has used it against minorities, and he used to be a pariah, a persona non grata for decades before he became the Prime Minister. When he became the Prime Minister, the entire world adjusted to his standards and to his priorities. This is also an irony of our times, how fascists and extremists were appeased last century, and they are being appeased in this century also. I mean, people and nations do not learn lessons from history. Last century there was a state which was which had a democratically elected autocrat, and he preached Nazism and practiced all sorts of discrimination against minorities. The same thing is happening in India. So what I'm saying is that you talked about Modi's network and connection. This is all based on realpolitik, not on principles, because when the Western nations invoked principles, they had in fact not given legitimacy to the way of life or to the doctrine of Mr. Modi.
Right. Mr. Sardar Mas'ud Khan, President of Azad Jammu Kashmir, many thanks indeed for joining us from your offices.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's our pleasure, sir. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you and to talk about the Kashmir cause from the inside. إذا إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع المقبل مع الجزء الثاني من هذا اللقاء الخاص. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinsight@الميادين.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل من كل فريق عمل برنامج من كل الميادين من بيت كشمير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.